So we have a fantastic group of panelists for you today to discuss broadening community support for making, and our moderator for that panel is Sherry Lassiter. She is the director of the FAB Foundation, and under her sort of vision, they were able to spin off the foundation from MIT to support its global network. And since she began, there are now 400 labs in more than 40 countries. And she actually flew in for this event from China. Is that true? That's awful?
No, I was supposed to go to China, but it didn't happen. So.
But we're just so thrilled to have her here today as our moderator for our community panel. So thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. This is a really hard act to follow, the sort of domino effect over there. That was pretty cool, you guys. Congratulations. Thank you to Lori and Rachel and Dorothy, all and Kip Bradford also for organizing this panel. I'm very excited because this is a really kind of fun group, and we've all kind of wanted to get together and talk anyway, so this is a great opportunity for us to do this. I'm going to introduce each person a little bit. I can't do them justice, but we'll try. The first person on my list is Andrew Coy, who's the Executive Director of the Digital Harbor Foundation. He's an educator, technologist, entrepreneur, and he co-founded the Digital Harbor Foundation Tech Center, which is a fairly recent tech center. Really wonderful space where young people come and engage in workshops and competitions and all sorts of STEM out-of-school education, which is really fantastic. And then I have, down at the end there, is Brian Jepson. He's the books publisher for Make. He's also an instigator. He starts all sorts of trouble in the community. He is the co-organizer of the Providence Geeks, and also he's organized the Rhode Island and DC mini maker fairs, so good for you. And he also, I ran across him in at AS 220. He sort of started the Fab Lab, or helped get the Fab Lab at AS 220 started there, and also is involved with all the other arts and other labs in that space, which is a really amazing space, and someday you all should come and visit it. And then we have Danielle Martin. She's the knowledge manager for the Intel Computer Clubhouse network based in Boston at the Museum of Science. She coordinates the knowledge sharing strategy and activity development for the global network. And that, for those of you who don't know, that emerged from a partnership between Intel and the MIT Media Lab. And she's the liaison for the Intel Making at Clubhouses initiative. And she's got a really rich history, including involvement in digital connectors, that program, AmeriCorps Vista, as well as research into mapping and mobile technologies and youth activism methodologies at MIT. So she actually started a research program there. And as my father likes to say, she's a pistol. And then I have Chad Ratliff here. He's Assistant Director of Instructional Programs at Ablemarle County Public Schools. He's the only representative today from the formal education sector, so he's a really important voice here. And he's a passionate and innovative educator. He's the district administrator with the County Public Schools in Charlottesville. Entrepreneur, appointed to the State Advisory Committee for Career and Technical Education, VP of Virginia Technology and Engineering Education. I mean, my God, the man's got like a million things going on. He's really busy, so it's a good thing that we have him here. So, welcome, panel. And just to get us all kind of thinking. Thinking in the same direction. I want to talk just a little bit about my perspective on sort of why we're here. If you think about the maker movement right now, it is a rapidly scaling movement. It's kind of taking over the world in its own way in terms of the out-of-school environment. It's wonderful. It's creative, it's imaginative, it's fun, it's magic. And but what's really interesting for me about it is that it's starting to drive national agendas in education and in economic sort of innovation from the perspective of a grassroots bottom-up movement rather than a top-down movement, and from the perspective of informal institutions rather than formal institutions, which is kind of unusual and kind of scary and kind of fun all at the same time. And so one of the things that this is doing is it's blending. One of the things that many of us have been interested in for a long time in is the blending of in and out of school learning, the flipping the bit, as it were, on where you learn and how you learn. And so the Maker Movement has been terrific at sort of encouraging that, but there's no roadmap. And we're starting to formal education is starting to borrow ideas from the informal sector to help with specifically STEM education. And they're looking to us as a community, they're looking to us to help them in figuring out how to make education better, how to make STEM education better. This is from my perspective. Some may not agree with me, but I definitely feel this in my interactions with the community every day. So as such, there are no established standards. Okay, it's kind of a wild frontier, and but we're at a point where we're accumulating our knowledge, our activities, our curriculum, and we're thinking about how we codify, in a way, what we're doing and how we integrate what we're doing into whether it's whether it's in or out of school. How do we blend the needs of formal education and informal education in STEM, and how do we broaden this frontier? So with that kind of as a sort of starting statement, I'd like to turn to our panelists and turn it over to you. Each one of you, I'd like to address how you got started making, or how your organization got started in making, and what was the particular thing that allowed it to be successful? Was it money? Was it materials? Was it a person? That sort of thing. So I'm going to pass it to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Sherry. So just one quick comment, for sake of time, I won't go into my personal story of how I started making and how I dropped out of college 4 times to do any number of things around the world. To borrow words from Mark Twain, I never let school get in the way of my education. But as I finally ended up in the inner city Baltimore teaching social studies, I remember telling my kids one day, I get you a job right now making a website. And I stopped and I said, well, if I just told you I could do that, and I know that I could, why don't I? And so I went out and found somebody in the community that needed a simple brochure-style website that could be done with a WordPress, customized thing. And I told them, you need a website? I have some kids that can make it for you. And I went to my kids and I said, I have a client that will pay you. And I kind of, was in between those two, helping the kids learn how to make the website for the client who is now going to be paying them for this website. And when I finished that, more kids kept knocking on my door saying, do you have more jobs? And I paid better than the street corner did. And so this was a really kind of, novel concept for these young people to be making, good money doing things that involve thinking and technology. And I started to find more opportunities. The school principal in the city was going one-to-one iPads in their 5th grade and knew that his teachers didn't know how to maximize the effectiveness of that technology tool. And he said to me, will you come provide PD? And I said, I have a better idea. Pay my kids to come and have them provide the PD. And so they were getting paid to come and tutor once a week, these teachers how to use the technology, and just sort of the transformation these young people went through as they saw real world opportunities for family sustaining careers in technology. And these were pathways out, and a lot of the kids didn't have internet at home, they didn't have access to these things, but yet, the school where I was teaching would shut down all the doors at 3 o'clock, and the kids would have to walk. In my neighborhood where I lived, I would see them walk into the library to get internet for 30 minutes. And I said, why, when we have this space here that has everything it needs but is being closed, why don't we kind of do something in the informal space? And to reference, a study out of MIT, many people are familiar with the 10,000 hours study that talks about this attaining mastery. I did the math once, and if you had 90 minutes of classroom instruction a day, plus an hour of homework a day, it would take you about 22 years of school to get to 10,000 hours. If you add in the after school time space, and not like every waking moment, but just a normal sort of 2 to 3 days a week in summertime, I can get that number down to 6 years. And so, as I was doing all these things in the out-of-school time space, just as a teacher that was crazy and my wife was putting up with it, I was talking to my principal and I said, is there a way that I could be doing this full-time? And he said, I can't pay you as a teacher and do this full-time, but if you can figure out another way, go for it. And right around the same time, the mayor was shutting down half of the city's rec centers, one of which was 2 blocks away. And I said, a rec center was a relic of kind of the industrial era. What we need today, however, are tech centers. Which is a youth-centered makerspace, and we need these to provide out-of-school time, informal, in-depth exploration for young people who are passionate, interested in technology, and want to find that pathway. And so I was, crazy enough to run around to all sorts of people during my lunch break, before school, after school, evening time, didn't matter when, where, or how, but I talked to enough people, and the school, through a partnership, was able to procure the space, and I was able to then run with it and turn the rec center into a tech center after a close down. And we've been open now for about 18 months, been running programs, for youth, from everything from web and app development to 3D printing, other types of electronic and circuitry, and really helping provide them a visible pathway into a career that is exciting, interesting, and that they wouldn't have had access to otherwise. So I'm happy to kind of answer more questions, but really to answer the simple question of how I get started with my young people, it was because this was something that I knew could provide them a pathway, and they were very interested in that, and I wasn't willing to stop until I figured out how to really help them move down that road.
Go for it. Go for it.
Thank you. So I think I'll sort of blend that question into why, what are the things that led me to the point where I think making an education is incredibly important for us to pursue. And I'll start with my personal experience. I'll keep it very brief, but as you'll detect there, if you haven't already, my accent, I'm from a small town in Southern Virginia. And as I began to progress through school, the farther along I got in school in terms of secondary, particularly once I entered high school, I started to notice the constrained environment in which we had to operate. It was, the bells would ring, and just like rats, we would need to run to the next class, and the teacher would tell us how to think and what to think about it, and unless we regurgitated what we were told in a way that the teacher approved and it was wrong. I challenged that constantly, and I'm glad to hear that I'm not the only person who did a survey of colleges and universities until I found one that would accept my credits, and give me a degree, but here I am today. The second thing is, when I stumbled into education, I taught in a very small micropolitan city in Virginia that is always annually the highest unemployment rate in the state, highest teenage pregnancy rate in the state, et cetera, et cetera. It was just made the list, the 7th most impoverished city in the country. And I spent almost 10 years as a teacher and coach in that district. And what I realized was that the more, as the environment was moving toward doubling down on the things that weren't working for students in an environment like that. For instance, you're not getting math, so what we need to do is double block you in math so we can do to you twice as much what we know is not already working for you. And it was just a terrible situation for these students. And so I ran in the opposite direction. And what I realized was, although the school environment and lifelong educators were telling me that the only way to get them is not smile before Christmas and to be very tight with them and tell them to sit down and be quiet, make sure they're staring at me when I walk across the room, I found the opposite to be true. I found out the more power that I gave them, the more authority I gave them, the discipline issues plummeted, the vocabulary leap stopped, the more engaged they were. And once I got them engaged and I got them to trust me, that I have their best interest in mind, it was off to the races. My principal wrapped a lot of support around me, and we were able to do some pretty interesting things. And I'm not a traditional educator, so I did teach for a while, but I've had some hops in and out along the way. I'm fortunate in that the district in Albemarle County, which is in Charlottesville, Virginia, superintendent we have is an amazing superintendent, and she very much believes in this and has been working for a number of years to build, to put all the levers and mechanisms in place where we can, as a public school district with 13,000 students, make informal learning environments, maker education front and first and foremost in the way that we do school. And she was looking for a cadre of district administrators to help her think that way and help her think how to get this, how to push this in. And so here I am today, and it's a great job, and I get to push the envelope and hear from folks like you and get a lot of feedback and think about things we need to do differently, but we're seeing some pretty amazing leaps, and it's an exciting time to be an educator, and I just thank everybody here for supporting this effort.
Thank you. I feel weird about being on a mic like this, but so the original question I think that Sherry gave us was around yourself and where you come from to this movement, and I think I struggle with that because the work I do with the Computer Clubhouse Network, and we work with youth 10 to 18, in urban, usually situations, disadvantaged situations, and that's not where I came from. But I think have a common story about where I come from. This work that I have found has resonated with the kids that we work with, and part of this is just around identity, and how you come to it and why you come to it. So I was a kid. I moved around a bunch when I was a kid, and then I moved in the middle of high school, and I was just trying to show up and meet people and get integrated into a community again. And so I showed up at Yearbook, which is like the geekiest place on earth in high school. Anybody's been in high school. And I didn't really know my place, and I had kind of grown up with doing a lot of crafting and making and arts and things like that. Like that was just part of my experience. But I had a teacher that handed me a camera and said, "You can do this. You're the photographer." And that moment of someone telling you can do this, I actually had the skills already. I had done a lot of art, but I needed someone to hand me that tool and someone to tell me you can do this. And I think the story of the Computer Clubhouse, if anyone's heard Mitch Resnick or Natalie Russ tell that story, was a lot about that they had they were from MIT and from the Computer Museum, and they just ran they knew that these kids from Roxbury, Dorchester were not getting access to doing these Lego robotics things, so they ran a workshop. And they just put those Legos right in the hands of the kids, and the kids loved it. And then what actually happened, they were like, "Okay, the workshop's over. Nice meeting you." And those kids just started showing up. And Natalie was working at the museum and was getting a call like, "There's a bunch of kids outside. They want to get in the museum. They think there's a robotics class." And there was a demand. And all it was is those kids, they probably showed up, because they wanted to play with the robotics, but they kept coming back because Natalie and Mitch had told them, "You can do this." And what they ended up doing was building a whole space around that and a program around that. And 20 years later, we're here. We're in 100 different places. We're in 20 different countries and a lot of different local contexts. And I think the common thread of that is, the kids being geeks and wanting to seek out that thing, but also someone telling them and creating a space for them and empowering them, like, you can do this, and just putting it in their hands and letting them run with it. So I think as we think about making and why, Clubhouse is really excited about this is, 20 years we've been doing making, we're just not calling it making, but it's that same energy of, can I identify someone that creates things and not consumes things? And do I get really excited about doing things myself and doing it with my hands? And all of that is based on someone putting that trust in their hand and building a community around that and telling them they can do it and identifying. So I think that's really key to, as we think about this, about being more inclusive about this work, is that really it's starting with that identity of, I am a maker, I am a creator, and I can do this, and then just everything after that is the pudding, right?
Thanks. I got to go last. So sorry that I've been scribbling and taking notes on my device, but Kip only recruited me to this panel a few days ago while we were in the heart of the fury of setting up the mini maker fair, and I just realized what I'm going to talk about now, and so I have all the notes here. But Sherry, could I ask you for a favor? Yeah. Just to make sure I haven't gone completely off the deep end. Kind of, listening to everybody here talk and kind of ripping off that. Could you restate the question?
It's sort of, how did you or your organization get involved in making, and what were the success elements to that? Whether was it materials, however you want to interpret.
I'm on track here. This is good. All right. So I'm gonna. I realized as I was sitting up here, I'm gonna answer that question for AS220, and I'm gonna keep my eye on Kip, because if I hyperbole or lies, stop me. Okay. Right. So AS220 got started making, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining what AS220 is, because as I explain why it works, it'll reveal aspects of it. AS220 got started making because its founder was angry about a bad review of his gallery exhibit. All right, and you can read that story elsewhere. So AS220 is an arts organization that helps people make things. From Live Work Studios is sort of the foundation of what it does, but there's all sorts of things from photo. There's a dark room. There's a print shop. There's the Providence Fab Lab is there. What makes it possible is its sustainability. It's approaching 30 years right now that AS220 has been around Providence. There's a term that I really like because it describes where AS220 came from. It's a term that I've seen applied to the Fluxus artists, Flux House Cooperative in Soho. It was sort of it was kind of like a sort of a housing scam / arts movement, which I think that kind of describes Fluxus. But the term is illegal living. They were occupying vacant buildings that they were renting, but they certainly were not zoned or permitted correctly. And that is where AS220 started, on Richmond Street in Providence, above a rock club that was called The Rocket, then called Club Baby Head. And then there were several artists, about a half dozen artists living there, shared space, shared bathroom, performance space, no performance license, BYOB, so at least they weren't serving alcohol illegally. That was good. And so they've gone from that to realizing, the key realization was that as a legit nonprofit, people actually give you money. So that worked out really well. And so that led to AS220 developing a building with various, cobbling together funding, and that's a whole other story, how they do that. It's actually quite interesting. But what they did is that at a key time in Providence's maturity, development, going from being a town with just a ton of vacant mills, ton of crime, some things that people call nuisance crime, nothing that, but still, but real violent crime too, which it still has to this day. But they cleaned up Empire Street in Providence. There was a bar on the corner that the Vice Squad was at several times a day. Adult video shops, all sorts of other activity on the street, and then they own that building, which is amazing. And over the years, they've developed other models for renovating buildings, using things like historic tax credits, bridge loans, all sorts of fun stuff. Kip and I have both been on the AS220 board, and the things that make board members freak out. But in the end, AS220 now owns 3 buildings around Providence. They all have Live Work Studios. They all have the old original building they developed has a youth program that works with kids who are incarcerated or otherwise at risk. It's the Providence Fab Lab, which I mentioned earlier, is in another building. There's numerous galleries. AS220 is also unjuried and uncensored, and all ages, so anybody who wants to exhibit or perform. And so where that led to is a pattern of ownership and earned income. It's a mixture of commercial and nonprofit activities that allows makers and artists to thrive, and just touches on all aspects of making. You can go into the Fab Lab. I mean, and Sherry and Kip, correct me if I'm lying. You could, and people I think do this. You could go and mill out or laser a block of type, and then you could bring it down to the letterpress next door, and you could print a book using a font that didn't exist at the time that letterpress was created. And so, and that's the magic of AS220.
Thank you. So what I got out of that, I got a few things out of that, and I hope our graphic recorder is getting some of this. Letting students do the mentoring, that seems to be an important success factor, and letting them do the prototyping and the jobs and have the relationship with the professional or corporations. Giving the students the power, basically. Empowering them to make decisions, to sort of guide their own learning. Access to the tools, access to the space, access to the people who are caring and who they trust. Very, very important to help you build your identification. And also sustainability, thinking outside of the box. I mean, AS220 is an extraordinary organization in how they've created sustainability through very, very different paths. So this next question, I just want a couple of you to try to answer this for us. How can making change a young person's life? Where do you see the most value in this work? And I'm going to put it to you, Danielle, first.
So I think I actually met a member of our Fairfax, Virginia, Robert spoke up Clubhouse yesterday, and I think she's a really great example, Wendy. And she's been going to the Clubhouse, she said, since she's 8. And she showed up to help out at our booth yesterday. I don't know if any of you met her yesterday, and I had never met her before. And she literally showed up and started talking about the Clubhouse better than I could. And I was, she's 17 years old. She's going to George Mason in the fall, I found out. But she told a really great story to me about, we do a youth summit every 2 years, and she got elected to come from her Clubhouse, and because she, the thing she was showing yesterday was an AC that they had made out of PVC pipes and using and then sort of done that themselves, and they're going to put solar panels on it. So she could have geeked out and talked about that, but she said, I got into this program that's like a precursor to get into George Mason, so, I can't come to Teen Summit, and I'm sad. But she said, I really want to go because, I'm going to major in bio, but I also kind of really like this like making stuff, and I'm really into computer science, but I also really like art, and I think there's a power to the making movement that's around, creating these Leonardo da Vinci's, where people, we encourage, high level. She's going into biology, and she got into a program, George Mason, and that's amazing, but she also wants to make things. She also wants to draw things. She also wants to make her own AC as part of what she's doing, and other students do that. So I think that's the power to this, is that it's not this very straight pathway, I'm going to become an engineer. We're actually building people that can, do lots of things and want to bring lots of different places and can show up and talk about it and be really excited about it when they talk about it. And I think that's one of the really clear outcomes of what we're doing. And also, she's also a woman, and she was not unconfident in that space and talking about those things. And it wasn't, cowing her language. So I was just really impressed with her, and I think that empowerment and having youth be able to speak for themselves like that very clearly is powerful.
Yeah, and I'll just add in 1 or 2 things real quick, which is young people are sick and tired of solving fake problems every day, all day long in school. One student I heard about was having a conversation, and they just said, what is school like? And his response was, school is where you go watch teachers work really hard. And that, how often is that the case? That kids are passive. It's like watching TV, right? You just go in there and you sit there and you're supposed to learn stuff, and then you regurgitate it, and yet there are so many real world problems out there that need to be solved, and there's no reason that the 12, 14, 18, 8-year-old can't solve that problem. And in fact, you look around and you start to see more and more of these stories of, like Jake Andraka from just north of Baltimore, who solves, or comes up with a new way to test for prostate cancer that's, an nth of the cost and far faster. And here he's 17 years old, and he had to, write 200 letters to different labs to try to find somebody to at least give him a space to try out his ideas. And he solves this problem. How often are we occupying kids with things that don't really matter and telling them that they're learning and patting ourselves on the back for feeling good about what they're doing, when you bring them into a space that's unstructured and you say, what do you want to make? And they will spend hours and hours and hours. You have to kick them out at the end of the night, every night, and say, go home, like, we got to close up, because they want to be there. In school, they can't wait to leave. So what are we doing that's different? And while young people can't necessarily articulate that, not every single one of them, more and more are finding their voice to be able to say, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to make. And I think by providing opportunities for making, we are letting them make a difference, and that's, that real student empowerment is what it's at the heart of the making movement, in my opinion. And as long as that stays at the heart, then it's on the right track, right? And it's going to take a lot of different shapes. And when we talk about how different it all looks, I like to think of biodiversity as a real health indicator. And if it all looks the same, if it's all one standard, then I feel like we are progressing rapidly towards the potential for a steep decline, right? I grew up in Alaska where wildlife management is something that's really important, and I saw herds or heard about herds that went from 40,000 to 4,000 in a year because of starvation. There wasn't a healthy ecosystem, and I think education is one that is suffering right now from an unhealthy ecosystem, and making is kind of this voice from the outside where I stepped out of the classroom into the out of school space because it allowed me to innovate and to show the path forward towards something that is less structured, but to do so in a way that isn't as risky for an administrator to look at and say, what is this crazy thing you're talking about? I'm like, no, these are your same kids who come to me on their own time after school and doing this amazing stuff that you're just like in awe of. And they can come teach you how to do it. In fact, one of the CEOs of the school district had one of my students for a year coming up and teaching them every morning at 7 a.m. how to make a website. And those types of things are possible, and that's what we need to be doing more of, is solving real world problems.
Cool, thanks. That's really interesting, actually. You want to take a shot at? Okay, just a few minutes.
Okay. First of all, yes. Exactly that. And another interesting thing to think about is so as a school district, public school district is trying to shift agency to kids in every classroom. And so to take what we're seeing in the informal environments, after school events and things that you're talking about, and figuring out how to make that the way that we do school. And we fundamentally believe that's possible. And what we believe will happen with that, I can take it from the philosophical to what we're seeing actually some research that the University of Virginia is doing within our classrooms. First of all, I fundamentally believe that if you take two students and one of them goes through 13 180-day iterations of compliance-based schooling, they're going to emerge and see the world in a very different way than somebody who had that same amount of time where they had a lot of ownership and a lot of power and a lot of authority in their educational experience. And I'm talking, we still today, kids have to raise their hand and ask to go to the bathroom. The most fundamental things in life, we make 17-year-old people ask permission to do these things in public education. I believe it's a fundamental error. And I think the more power and the more control, and there are people in this room that I know have gone through a public educational setting that doesn't look like that. And you can do that, and it can be done, and we're trying to do that. The other thing is, interesting story, that as a public school district, we can't just throw spaghetti at the wall all the time. We have to document what we're doing. We have to prove as good stewards of tax dollars that what we're doing is effective. Right now we have some preliminary research. It's unpublished yet, but just a quick story of what this is. So we have University of Virginia professor of mathematics watching and observing students who were learning math through making. I'm not a researcher, but fundamentally what they did was they printed with paper, with a cameo silhouette, so it's paper printing and folding, whatever they could dream up that had angles and things like that. So the researcher then gave the student a test, multiple choice test, and say, okay, what'd you learn about math? These mathematical concepts, and the scores were okay. Then they said the other question was, okay, can you tell us about what it is you learned? And they got a little bit better. But when they were able to reach for their object and hold it in their hand and describe what they made, they hit it every time, because there was context, that authentic context to content. And so the challenge for us is to figure out how to teach content, and I'm using that word very loosely, but how to give content context through making. And that's not an easy thing to do, but I believe it's possible, and it's certainly a worthwhile mission.
It kind of relates back to Seymour Papert's work. He talked a lot about objects to learn by and making and building and your own learning tools in essence. So I think that very much maps to what you're talking about. So then let's, if we want to scale this kind of making for STEM education, for education in general, what are we going to ask for? What do we need in order? If we're going to ask for support, what are we asking for support for? And so I'd like to throw that to you first, you guys. And actually, Brian, do you want to take a first whack at that?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. I think I'm going to ask the ancient question: is this thing on? Yes. All right. I think what is most useful and where I see the needle moving a lot is our toolkits for creating spaces and programs. And an idea that has been around a lot at ASU20 is around developing pattern languages, in the, not necessarily just like the software sense, more towards the original Christopher Alexander sense of identifying, a word that, finding a word that identifies something meaningful, something that the organization is doing or that people can do, that other folks can go and implement by studying the pattern language. And this is something over the years that ASU20's former managing director, Sean Wallace, and now labs manager of the programming and the lab around the Fab Lab in Providence, has always wanted to do. And now that he's back at the organization, I'm going to remind him, because ASU20, in a pattern language, Christopher Alexander would lay things out like promenade. That was the name of it. It was a space where people would want to walk around at night and talk and interact. And then the pattern itself would describe how you achieve that. Physical plant, what affordances. The pattern language that all organizations that we represent here, we've learned things and we do things, and we're the best people who know how to articulate this stuff. What we don't have is time, right, to go and write this stuff down. So how can this be? How do we support it? Do we bring in? Does somebody fund or magically create a facilitator who comes in and observes and interviews? This is the sort of thing, and a lot of organizations that we're talking about here, we don't even have time to pause. This is why Sean has never been able to do it, because he's busy, So how do we document it, whether it's a pattern language? I think we can create toolkits for people, and Dale's back there. We've done Makerspace Playbook, Maker Faire Playbook, and that's a model, I think. These are things that we give out online for free, PDFs. You can pick it up, and maybe there is somebody who's got the time, or an organization who can bring somebody in. But the playbooks are very successful. They're very useful. Anybody doing a mini Maker Faire, including those of us who did it this past weekend, the playbook is indispensable. It's got all the secrets in it. So.
I'm going to throw in my 2 cents here. I feel like one of the things that we need is the research. But while we're starting to establish some of the research around the country in a very few places, we don't really have the research in place and the evaluation and the assessment of what we're doing. And that's expensive. That's very, very expensive and very hard to get that kind of funding. And so I would put that at the top of my list, is the sort of research and evaluation of what we're doing related to what you're saying, but codified in a way. And I think one of the biggest barriers, is the people, the researchers to do it. And I think they're out there, and there are some that are already doing it, but we need more, and we need the funding for it. I think we need the structure and the funding for it. Okay.
Yeah, and I think wrapping that all up in a phrase, which is, I think we need formal support for informal learning. As a school, you get dollars that come to you every year. You don't have to go ask for. As an out-of-school time provider, every single day, the things that we're doing are paid for by my activities going out and getting that money to pay for it, because the young people that are benefiting from it are not the people that are paying for it, right? So if you had formal support for informal learning, you could provide the support for the research, which is a part of that. You can provide support for innovating and in creating more opportunities Some of my funders are absolutely fabulous and they get this and they're right there next to me saying, don't spend time writing a proposal to me for what you want to do. Spend time creating the program that I know you're going to do and go off and do it. Like, going through these forever cycles of funding, and anybody that's written, a federal grant knows how much work that is, and it can be, big dollars, and there needs to be sort of the responsibility for how tax dollars are allocated. But this is where I think finding better streams of formal support for informal learning would provide immeasurable kind of sustainable ongoing support for this. And until we have that stream, it's going to be the kind of passionate people that are out there doing stuff who aren't thinking how am I going to pay for myself to live. It's just that this has to be done. We're going to do this and figuring out the back way kind of to funding it. It's going to be those folks that are leading it, and that's only a drop in the bucket for the number of kids that have access.
I think the other thing I would add, I'd like two quick things, is that one thing that we've seen with the Computer Clubhouse Network is that, being really rooted or as far as sustainability in youth outcomes and not the technologies. So unfortunately we have computer in the name of who we are, but we're more than computers. And so every time we go back in our evaluation tools and things that we're doing and the way we measure what we're doing are youth outcomes. Are the kids leaders? Are they be able to talk about what they do? Do they express comfort with the technology? So over time, you can pretty much insert any tool. It used to be Lego Mindstorms, and now it's a 3D printer and a vinyl cutter. But it's the same program. It's the same learning model. And I think the other thing that is really important that I heard today in some of the conversations I've heard is, you do need, national and international level of advocacy in saying this is important, but it actually trickles down to almost the unit level, on the ground support within organizations. So YMCAs, Boys and Girls Clubs, informal learning spaces, really having people within them say, this is important and we should keep this going. And the clubhouses that have been around, in the beginning, got an initial push from Intel to start, but then they had to start finding funding locally. And if they didn't have that even within their organization, that is, very challenging. And I think what's hard with this work with making is to describe it and to document it and to understand it. So we were saying, some of these maker spaces, people come in and they it's chaos in there. And because it's process oriented, it's not product oriented, they don't see all the work and the learning that came out with the kids by the final product all the time. So we need some tools to create that advocacy that people understand the outcomes, and the outcomes aren't that a kid knows how to build a robot. It's that they knew that they could build a robot, and that they did build a robot, and that they were able to talk about it and apply it to other parts of their lives.
I agree with that completely. I was going to add that the first thing we need to do as a society is determine what's worth measuring. Right now we have, I'm often told that we want to be able to measure critical thinking. We want to be able to measure innovation, innovativeness, entrepreneurialism, et cetera, et cetera. But there's never any funding stream. The reason why I'm told we can't do portfolios, and I'm not saying Ablemarle County, but public education, is because it's much cheaper to do standardized testing. And now we're looking at that at a federal level to bring that cost even down, because you can scale assessments. So if we're gonna build out assessments, that takes a lot of time. We are doing that within Albemarle County. We spend a lot of time in the summers, a lot of time that folks don't have to figure out, and it took a lot of time to work with our board to get them to a place to say, this is worth measuring. And then we have to put the assessments in place, but we're doing that without much any support from outside dollars. So it would be very helpful in partnerships or otherwise if folks could help A, determine what's worth evaluating, and then B, help come up with quality assessments to evaluate those things.
So you say I've got 5 minutes, right? Is that before we ask questions, or is that, okay. Well then, there's much to talk about. Obviously we could talk all day, and we'd love to talk about it, but I'd like to open this up to you a little bit and find out what questions you might have in this regard. Who do you think are the stakeholders that are missing here? And what do we need to do to scale from your perspective? Can I?
Yeah, so maybe we'll take 2 comments. So I'm going to go.
Just a brief question, and that is, I heard you talk about public education. Are you also including in the activities that you do, and it sounds like you are, private education, charter schools, homeschooling, all of those different avenues that include so many of our learners?
Certainly I do. I mean, I wrap them as learning environments, and so I do. Anybody else?
Just a quick, yes, both formally and informally, we work with charters. We actually, in Virginia, there are 4 charter schools, 2 of them are in our district. They're authorized by our district, so we see the value in chartering as a strategy for sort of laboratory environments.
I think part of this is valuing where the kids show up and where they're at and where the learning is happening. So I think part of that is, leveling the playing field. That things happen in schools, they happen out of schools, they happen in formal schools and not schools, but it's where the kids are actually showing up. We do a lot around like voting with your feet. So if they're not coming, they're not in a formal school, they're not showing up to school, but they're showing up in informal school, I'm going to go where they're at and support that. And I think that's important to build sustainability around that.
I'm very interested in diversity and broadening participation, and so it concerns me when I don't hear some groups addressed, because it means we're probably not thinking about them. So I think for the informal, it's really important that we're reaching into those communities, because it's really hard to get those kids who aren't participating in the formal system. Thank you for what you're doing. You had great ideas.
I want to speak to that real quickly. The way AS220, at one point in AS220's development, they realized that they were not bringing in people from underrepresented groups. And there's some genius in this, even if it seems weird at first. That drove the decision to move to focus on incarcerated youth, because this country disproportionately incarcerates people who are not white. AS220 was very white until that happened, and that's changed radically. So you got to go, if you want to broaden participation, sometimes there's a really quick way to do that. And Kip, would you agree with everything I said?
Just a comment to that. AS220 has one of the highest or lowest recidivism rates for all the kids that they deal with at our the state school where kids who get arrested go. And they also have, I think we work with 83% of the incarcerated youth in the state. So it is a highly transformational program in terms of what we're doing to eliminate some of the factors that cause these kids to get arrested in the first place.
One last point to that, I don't want to be a downer, but there have been a few occasions, because we're talking about kids who are in gangs, and let's remember the recidivism rate that Kip mentioned. But if you decide to work with this population, you need to be prepared. You're going to lose some kids that you care a lot about, and I've been, I haven't worked directly with the kids. I've always been on the board or advising, but I've been there when the organization has been told, or stakeholders in the organization have been told about a kid that lost his life on the street. Most recently, it was a month or two ago at a public town meeting that AS220 held, and I'd actually heard about the shooting in the news, and it was a young man, I believe, who was a participant in the program. But you know what? If you want to change the world, you're going to have to put your you're going to have to put your heart on the line, and you're just you can't always be completely detached. It's okay to cry, actually.
Thank you, and thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you so much, everyone. We appreciate it.